Texas, 1881. The late summer sun leaned low, brushing its heat across the land like an old sorrow refusing to let go. A wooden cabin stood crooked at the edge of a forgotten prairie where grass grew up through broken porch slats and the wind slipped through the shutters as if whispering names no one answered. The cabin bore no signs of joy or fury, only the stillness that lingers after both have gone. Just beyond the steps, two things rested side by side, a cradle that had never rocked and a grave marked with a weather-worn ribbon. The soil there had settled long ago, but grief hung in the air like smoke that wouldn't lift. He visited that grave every morning, not out of duty, not out of hope, just because his body still remembered the rhythm of before. Inside the cabin, silence had settled into the corners. It lived in the floorboards, in the uneven breath he took when waking. He rarely spoke. When he did, it was to the horses, or to the fire, or to the memory of a voice that once sang about apricots and spring rains. Each dawn, he placed firewood on the doorstep. No one knew why. Maybe he didn't either. Habit, perhaps, or apology. The trail leading to his land had long stopped expecting visitors. Dust blew across it freely, undisturbed by hoof or boot. But that morning, something shifted. A murmur in the distance. A rising thread of movement against the still horizon. He squinted. Dust, yes, but shaped by human weight, not wind. A figure, no. Two. A woman, walking, and clutched against her chest, a child crying in that raw, relentless way only babies do. Her pace did not quicken. Her eyes did not lower. She carried herself like someone whose last refuge had already been lost, and still she walked. He did not move from the porch, just watched. His hands tightened slightly on the axe handle leaning beside him, not in defense but in memory. He had seen desperation before, but this was different. It wasn't desperation that kept her moving. It was something quieter, something heavier. She crossed the fence line without pausing, without knocking, and kept walking until she reached the cabin steps. The baby wailed. She did not shush it, not yet. The wind pushed against the doorframe, as if to enter first, but she was already inside. And for the first time in years, the house held 3 heartbeats. Not one, not none, 3. She did not ask. She did not explain. She simply bent down and removed her boots, leaving them by the door as if she'd once lived here, or meant to. Her socks were threadbare, one heel bloodied. But she stepped across the wooden floor like it owed her nothing, and she asked for even less. He watched from the threshold, arms crossed, the scent of dust and milk, and something older rising around them. The baby cried, not a scream but a plea, constant and jagged. She cradled it to her chest, humming a lullaby in a tongue he couldn't place. It wasn't English. It wasn't Spanish. It was the language of someone who had learned to comfort without words. Her voice cracked once, but she kept singing. The baby quieted, not all at once, but enough. She found the stove without looking, opened the kettle, boiled water with the same hands that trembled when they rested. On that stove, years before, he had burned a stack of letters, not because he hated what they said, but because he feared what they remembered. She didn't ask what had blackened the iron. She didn't ask anything at all. When she saw his old coat hanging limp behind the door, she didn't hesitate. She folded it gently and laid it beside her child, as if the wool could still carry warmth, or courage, or memory. It was not an intrusion. It was a gesture, quiet, steady, like someone tending to a wound they hadn't caused, but still chose to wrap. He could have told her to leave, could have said the house was full of ghosts, of silence, of history, but he said nothing. That night, he watched her from his chair by the fire, her back to him, her baby curled beside her on the floorboards. She did not turn, but she stayed. When he woke the next morning, for the first time in years, he realized he had slept. No dreams, no startle, just the hush of shared breathing. He found his boots already by the door, and beside them hers, small, frayed, aligned. She hadn't taken a place, she had created one. She began to move through the cabin with quiet intention, like a wind that dusts rather than destroys. Corners he had ignored for years were swept clean. She didn't do it all at once. There was no rush, just small acts, the kind only someone staying longer than a night would bother with. He watched without comment, hands rough from chopping wood that now stacked higher than usual, not because it was colder, but because he liked hearing the baby laugh when the axe struck just right. The child laughed at dust, at light, at things no adult ever paused to see. When the sun angled through the window near dusk, the dust in the air would sparkle and swirl, and the baby would giggle, reaching chubby fingers into what must have looked like magic. And somehow in those moments the The cabin felt less like a tomb and more like a breath just held. She hummed when she stirred the stew, not always. Just when the baby had settled and the light outside softened, the tune changed, some nights low and mournful, others hopeful in a way that made his chest ache. He never asked what the songs meant. It was enough that they existed. One morning, he realized something unfamiliar had crept into his bones, anticipation. He waited for her footsteps on the stairs, for the sound of the kettle lifting, for the soft way she whispered to the baby when no one else was listening. These weren't grand things, they were rhythms, and he, a man who had not trusted rhythm since the cradle stopped rocking, found himself listening for them like a prayer. The house did not transform. The grave was still there, the cradle still untouched. But there was dust in the light, and a baby laughing, and something inside him stirring, not like a storm, but like spring thaw under snow. It was early, the kind of morning when dew still clings to the grass and the sky has yet to choose its color. He was feeding the mule when he heard it, hooves deliberate and slow, the kind of gait that doesn't ask for welcome, it demands attention. He straightened, wiped his hands on his trousers, and waited. The rider came into view like a memory rising too soon. His clothes were too fine for this land, his boots polished, his hat untouched by wind. He dismounted with practiced grace and called her name before he even reached the porch. She stepped out slowly, the baby already cradled tight against her chest, her shoulders pulled back, not in pride, in preparation. The child, once fussy and full of noise, fell silent as if it too understood the shift in air. The man did not look at the baby. He looked at her and offered money, not modest, not polite, a stack of it, as if that weight could buy what he claimed he lost. She did not respond. Her eyes did not flicker. She glanced instead to the porch, where the shovel leaned, soil still crusted on its blade. The message was quiet, but it was heard. He stepped forward. Just one step. Enough. That was all it took for the man of the cabin to move. He came to stand between them, not threatening, not loud, but immovable. A mountain with a heartbeat. No words were exchanged, not then, but the stranger understood. Some truths do not need translation. He left without turning his back, retreating like pride that knows it's no longer welcome. She stood there for a long time after the dust had settled, her eyes not on the man who had defended her, but on the ground beneath her feet. It was the first time he saw her shake, not from fear, from relief she hadn't dared believe in. That night, no stew was made, no music hummed, but when he passed her the last piece of bread, she took it, and their hands touched, and neither pulled away. The sun had already risen when he noticed it. The room was quiet, not the quiet of sleep, but the quiet of absence. The cradle, which had always remained untouched, now held something soft, a blanket, folded with care, the kind of fold that says what words refuse to. The coat was gone, the child too. The air still carried a warmth that did not belong to the fire. He stood there, holding the blanket like it might answer him if he waited long enough. But no answer came. There was no trail, no note, no sound of steps fading into distance. Only the memory of her humming and the baby's laugh echoing in corners, now silent again. He boiled water out of habit or mourning, he could not say, but it whistled louder than before, almost accusing. For days he did not sleep, not deeply, not truly. Each night he left the door slightly ajar, though the wind stole through it like regret. The woodpile dwindled, the kettle rusted, but still he waited. When dust finally rose again on the horizon, his hand gripped the doorframe, not to brace against danger, but to steady the ache of hope. He no longer knew if it was fear or longing, but he stood, he waited, and behind him, in the cradle, the blanket remained, unmoved, a quiet testimony that someone had once chosen to stay, and might choose to return. She didn't arrive in a storm. There was no gallop, no sound to warn of her coming, just the soft rustle of grass giving way beneath worn boots. He was on the porch, not expecting her, not ready for her, but still, he stood. Her walk was slower now, not broken, just changed, a limp in her left leg, a tightness in her shoulders. The child clung to her, eyes wide, but not afraid. Her face carried weeks of sun and silence, and one scar, thin, healed, unforgiving. She said nothing, neither did he, but her gaze met his without flinching. That was new, and when she crossed the threshold, she didn't look for permission this time. She simply passed the cradle, touched the blanket gently, and sat. That night, the stew boiled longer than it needed. He added carrots. She salted the broth. They ate, facing forward, not toward each other, but near. Her chair, closer than before, not beside, but near. When the child spilled water, she smiled, not fully, not broadly, but enough to shift something in the air. He caught the cloth before it fell. She noticed. Before dawn, he walked outside and nailed a horseshoe above the door, not for luck. He didn't believe in that, but because something needed finishing. A circle, a sentence never spoken. Forgiveness, he learned, doesn't always arrive with words. Sometimes it's in the way someone breathes near you without armor. Sometimes it's in staying, even after you've left. He no longer rose at dawn to visit the grave, not because the grief had vanished, but because it no longer ruled him. Some mornings, when the sky hung low and the air felt like breath held too long, he would pass by the resting place, not to speak, not to kneel, just to be near, just to remember without unraveling. The cradle no longer sat empty, untouched. It held firewood now, cedar stacked neatly, like a gesture offered in place of prayer. It was her idea, or perhaps the child's, or perhaps grief's way of asking to be useful. He didn't ask. He simply laid the logs there each evening, watching the way the cradle held them gently without protest. She tended the garden, not with fervor, but with rhythm, pulling weeds in silence, pressing seeds into soil like blessings. The child followed ants with fascination, watching how they carried burdens 10 times their size without breaking. Sometimes the child laughed. Sometimes the child cried. Both were welcome sounds. They didn't speak of what had passed, not out loud. But when the wind blew through the cabin now, it carried different smells. Not ash, not silence, but stew simmering, earth turned, soap in a basin still warm. He mended the fence, slowly, with care. Each plank a promise, not of permanence, but of effort. She hung the laundry. He fed the chickens. The child grew teeth. Seasons passed not in pages or calendars, but in small, faithful acts. And one evening, as dusk stretched itself across the prairie, the cradle rocked once, just once. No wind, no hand, just movement, slight, certain, before settling again. They noticed. Neither said a word. That night, when he lit the lantern, the glow didn't fight the darkness. It softened it. And as he closed the door, he looked at her. She looked back. They had not declared anything. No promises, no futures, but they had stayed. They had witnessed one another, and in doing so, they had transformed what once was a house into something else entirely. A home, perhaps. The wind still slipped through the shutter, but now it carried the smell of stew, not sorrow.